In 1991, 8 years after Return of the Jedi, a writer named Timothy Zahn did the thing everyone was afraid to do. He wrote what happened next. Not a cash-in, a real sequel, 3 books, picking up 5 years after Endor, with a villain unlike anything the films had dared, Grand Admiral Thrawn. No force powers, no red lightsaber, just a cold, brilliant strategist from the edge of the galaxy who studied his enemy's art, their literal paintings, their music, their culture, and used it to predict exactly how they'd fight, and who damn near brought the infant New Republic to its knees with nothing but intelligence and patience. For a whole generation, this was the sequel trilogy. It was canon. It was loved. And then, in 2014, a company in Burbank deleted it, and a few years later handed us a resurrected emperor and a trilogy that contradicted itself between films. We were told the old story had to go to make room for something better. So let's talk about what we actually traded, and whether anything we got was worth what we gave up. Return of the Jedi hit theaters in May 1983. After that, the main heroes of Star Wars, Luke, Han, Leia, had no major adult continuation novels for 8 years. Marvel's comic run ended in 1986. The Ewok TV movies were children's content. The franchise, by the late 1980s, had gone quiet. One transmedia historian described the period between 1985 and 1991 as a fallow stretch. Star Wars was far from the public's awareness. Then, Bantam Spectra approached Lucasfilm about a new novel series. George Lucas was skeptical, but gave the go-ahead, and Bantam brought in Zahn. The restrictions were precise. The story had to be set after Return of the Jedi. The Clone Wars era was off-limits because Lucas wanted that territory for himself, and no dead characters, including Darth Vader, could come back. Within those constraints, Zahn had significant freedom to build. Heir to the Empire was published May 1st, 1991. Its original print run of 60,000 copies sold out in its first week. By the week of June 30, 1991, it had climbed to number 1 on the New York Times bestseller list, knocking John Grisham's The Firm from the top slot on the way up. By the time the trilogy was complete, the 3 books had sold a combined 15 million copies. Lucasfilm immediately began commissioning more novels. The expanded universe, as it would come to be known, was born from one book's success. Zahn's trilogy is widely credited with revitalizing the entire Star Wars franchise, and Penguin Random House still describes the first book as the novel that jump-started 2 decades of Star Wars publishing. Thrawn, full name Mithra Nuruodo, is a Chiss, blue-skinned, with eyes that glow red, from the unknown regions at the galaxy's edge. He holds the rank of Grand Admiral, the highest naval position in the Imperial hierarchy, appointed personally by the Emperor. In Legends, this rank was restricted to a small handful of officers empire-wide, and Thrawn was the only non-human ever to hold it. That detail matters because the Empire of the films was explicitly xenophobic, and Palpatine made an exception for this one alien commander because losing Thrawn would have cost him more than tolerating him. The art reading is where Zahn did something no one in Star Wars had tried. Thrawn's core methodology, confirmed in the StarWars.com databank, was studying his enemy's art, their visual culture, their music, their aesthetic choices, to understand their psychology and predict their behavior in battle. He argued that a species' art reflects the soul of that species, how they see fear, how they process loss, how they conceive of strength and surrender. Master that, and you hold the tactical manual for how they'll fight. What this means in practice is that Thrawn could walk into a gallery and come out knowing which sectors of a fleet would hold under pressure and which would break. Zahn designed him this way deliberately. In a franchise where virtually every villain either wields the Force or commands a weapon large enough to destroy a planet, Thrawn wins through intellect. He never raises his voice. He doesn't threaten his subordinates with death for failures, a deliberate contrast to Vader, who managed through terror and force choke. Thrawn promotes officers who show initiative. He builds a command structure that functions because people respect it. As Zahn explained, most Imperial commanders followed what he described as a hit it with a rock school of dealing with opposition. Thrawn, in contrast, used strategy and careful planning, and was usually 2 or 3 steps ahead. To neutralize the one tactical edge his enemies had, Force-sensitive fighters, specifically Luke Skywalker, Thrawn deployed Ysalamiri. These are small, lizard-like creatures, native to the planet Merkur, that evolved the ability to push back the Force to protect themselves from Vornskers, Force-sensitive predators that hunted through that connection. A single Ysalamir creates a Force null bubble around itself. Multiple Ysalamiri in proximity overlap their bubbles into larger zones. Because the creatures die when separated from their nutrient trees, Thrawn had Imperial engineers build portable frames of pipes that could support and nourish them away from Merkur, allowing him and his soldiers to move through the galaxy wearing walking Force voids. Jedi attack simply faded at the edge of the bubble. No lightsaber, no battle meditation, no Force sense could reach him inside it. That is how you solve the Jedi problem if you're Thrawn. Not by becoming a dark side wizard, by studying biology, engineering a frame, and removing the variable entirely. He ran his campaign against the New Republic through a series of operations that each demonstrate the same principle. Find the structural weakness, apply minimal force at precisely the right point, and let the target's own momentum destroy it. He engineered false evidence of financial misconduct against Admiral Akbar, framing the New Republic's top military commander and forcing his removal at the height of a military offensive. He planted a listening post inside the Imperial Palace on Coruscant, Delta Source, feeding New Republic deliberations directly to his fleet. In the trilogy's final act, he placed cloaked asteroids in orbit around Coruscant and then withdrew the ship, leaving the New Republic unable to detect how many asteroids existed or where they were. The galactic capital had to shut down all space traffic. He'd blockaded the most important planet in the galaxy without firing a shot. His death is as precise as his life. His own Nogri bodyguard, Rook, turns on him after Leia convinces the Nogri people that the Empire had poisoned their homeworld while pretending to repair it, that their centuries of loyalty were built on a lie. Thrawn's Empire engineered. Rook kills him on the bridge of the Star Destroyer Chimera. Thrawn's last recorded observation, per the novel, was reportedly that the assassination had been artistically done. The galaxy Zahn built around Thrawn was equally serious. 5 years after Endor, the New Republic is governing, and struggling. Winning a war against a galactic empire is different from running the galaxy it left behind. There's factional infighting on the Council. The military is stretched. New Republic politicians maneuver against each other for advantage, while Thrawn is actively dismantling their infrastructure. Leia is pregnant with twins, Jacen and Jaina Solo, born during the cloaked asteroid crisis in The Last Command, and simultaneously serving as a senior Republic diplomat and training in the Force under Luke's guidance, while Nogri assassins hunt her. Luke is the sole active Jedi Knight, with no academy and no order, trying to figure out what it means to rebuild something that was systematically destroyed. Han Solo is a New Republic operative, whose criminal network connections are now the government's actual intelligence source, because the Republic doesn't have enough reach in the Outer Rim to function without smugglers. These aren't the heroes frozen in 1983. They're people who won, and now have to live with what winning means. Not everything in the trilogy is equally strong. Jerus Sabaoth, an insane clone of a dead Jedi Master, recruited by Thrawn to use Force abilities for fleet coordination, is widely considered the weakest element. Too broadly drawn, his megalomania eventually working against Thrawn's meticulous planning rather than complementing it. And the broader EU that followed Zahn's trilogy varied enormously in quality. The expanded universe ran for more than 3 decades and included hundreds of novels and thousands of comics, and not all of it was at Zahn's level. Some of it became actively contradictory. Power creep among villains became a structural problem. Each new threat had to be bigger, which eventually broke the scale of what any individual story could mean. The honest case for the Thrawn trilogy isn't that it was perfect, it's that it was genuinely good, and it built something, a cause and effect post-ROTJ galaxy with real political weight, a villain who was frightening because he was right about how you defeat your enemies, and 3 characters allowed to grow up. On October 30th, 2012, Disney announced the acquisition of Lucasfilm for approximately $4.05 billion. Kathleen Kennedy was named Lucasfilm president, and the Lucasfilm Story Group, with members including Pablo Hidalgo, Leland Chee, and Kiri Hart, began forming to manage what the new canon would look like. On April 25, 2014, the official StarWars.com post went up. Its title was, "The Legendary Star Wars Expanded Universe Turns a New Page." Everything produced before that date was rebranded as Star Wars Legends and declared non-canonical going forward. 35 years of books, comics, and games, hundreds of novels, thousands of comics, were reclassified in a single announcement. The stated reason was to give filmmakers maximum creative freedom and preserve an element of surprise for audiences. One complication worth being precise about: the EU was never on fully equal footing with the films, even before Disney. Under George Lucas, Lucasfilm maintained a tiered canon system where the films sat at the top and the novels occupied a lower tier that the films could override at any time. Lucas himself described the EU as a parallel universe, separate from his film universe, and he didn't read most of it. Disney's 2014 decision simplified and formalized a hierarchy that had always existed. The books weren't pulled from shelves. They remain in print under the Legends banner, and you can read all 3 Zahn novels right now. What the decision actually cleared was the obligation to be consistent with 35 years of story, and specifically, it cleared the sequel trilogy filmmakers from having to account for any of it. No Han and Leia twins, no New Republic administration, no Mara Jade, no Thrawn. A blank slate for the story of what happened next. What filled that slate? A faction called the First Order, whose rise from the Empire's defeat isn't explained in the films themselves. A superweapon called Starkiller Base, a planet converted into a weapon capable of destroying star systems, which critics and academics alike identified as a structural reset of the Death Star concept, essentially the same story beat used a third time. A villain named Snoke, killed in the second film before any explanation of who he was, then retroactively revealed in the third film to have been a clone instrument of Palpatine, who had somehow returned, an event announced in the opening text crawl of The Rise of Skywalker, without the prior films having set it up. Rey's parentage was presented as one answer in The Last Jedi and a different answer in The Rise of Skywalker, a direct contradiction between films. The Rise of Skywalker grossed $1.077 billion, the lowest of the sequel trilogy, 52% of what The Force Awakens had earned. Its Rotten Tomatoes critical score settled at 51%. The sequel trilogy's core problem wasn't the quality of any individual film. It was that the 3 movies weren't telling a coordinated story. The Thrawn trilogy, 3 books by one author, published over 3 years, had a plan from the first page. Each book built on what came before. Thrawn's death in the third book lands because every prior scene established exactly who he was and exactly what losing him would cost. The cloaked asteroids around Coruscant work as a climactic threat because the trilogy spent 3 books establishing that this is how Thrawn thinks. Maximum disruption, minimum footprint, and your own system's protocols become your captor. The audience knows all of this. The grief in the comments isn't generational sentiment. It's a critical verdict expressed consistently across years of fan engagement. Across Star Wars YouTube, the comment, "They should have just adapted the Thrawn trilogy," keeps accumulating hundreds of likes on videos that don't even ask the question directly. On peer channels covering the EU, sentiments like, "This would have been far better than the new trilogy we got," have drawn thousands of upvotes. The register isn't rage, it's loss. The specific, quiet grief of people who had something real and can name exactly what replaced it. That's a different emotional frequency than general franchise disappointment, and it's been consistent since April 25, 2014. Thrawn himself, notably, was too good to abandon entirely. In September 2016, Star Wars Rebels Season 3 introduced him as the primary Imperial antagonist, voiced by Lars Mikkelsen, who reportedly cried at the audience reaction to his character at Star Wars Celebration. Timothy Zahn's Facebook post when the announcement came. Thrawn! Grand Admiral Thrawn is officially part of the new Star Wars canon. Zahn went on to write 6 new canon novels featuring the character, and Lars Mikkelsen played him in live action in the Ahsoka series in 2023. Even Disney, it turned out, couldn't throw away the character. They brought him back into canon, but not his story. They kept the villain and discarded the world he inhabited. Not the New Republic he nearly destroyed, not Mara Jade, who reportedly remains off the table for canonical inclusion, and not the specific, complete, consequence-driven three-book narrative that a generation read as the truth of what happened after Endor. We didn't need a sequel trilogy. We had one. 3 books, a villain smart enough to win a war by studying his enemy's paintings, a galaxy allowed to grow up and bear the weight of everything the first film set in motion, and a generation that grew up treating it as the truth of what came next. In 2014, it became a legend, which is the word you use for a story you've decided to stop honoring. And the thing they cleared the shelf to make room for contradicted itself between films and brought back a villain we'd already watched die. They told us the old story had to go so the new one could breathe. Then they showed us the new one. That's why, years later, the loudest thing the fanbase keeps saying isn't an argument. It's a sentence with a title in it. They should have just made Thrawn. Subscribe for more stories like this.